Good evening, everyone. Good evening and welcome. I'm Harold Holzer, and I have the privilege of serving as director of Roosevelt House here at Hunter College. And on behalf of President Jennifer Rabb, who's here, it's a great pleasure to welcome this crowd for an event at which we will hear from our dear friend and distinguished advisory board member, Stan Litow. And I want to welcome several other members of our advisory board who are here. Tony Stepansky, who's hiding in the back row, but he's here, and Norton Garfinkel, who's not hiding in the front row. Welcome to both of you. So we're meeting, of course, in the New York City home of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt, built for them in 1908 by Franklin's mother, Sarah Roosevelt, as a wedding present. And for those of you who are new to our programs, and I see some new faces tonight, thanks to Stan, I should just mention briefly that this is the home at which he recovered from polio, the home where he rededicated himself to public service, where he began and ran his campaigns for governor of New York in 1928 and 30, and from which he ran for the presidency in 1932. It was also the transition headquarters between November 1932 and March 1933. In the library, just a few floors above where you're sitting, Franklin Roosevelt and his brain trust conceived of most of the foundational elements of the New Deal, including Social Security, which was born in this building. This coming fall, we're going to mark the 75th anniversary of the transfer of this building to Hunter College. And we are planning to mark that milestone with an exhibition and some programming. So stay tuned for that. That'll be coming in November. Eleanor was here for the dedication, and we are going to make an effort to see that in some form and with some wonderful performer, she will be here again in November of 2018. I have to mention that just a few days ago, we marked another milestone, another anniversary, and I want to acknowledge it because without her incredible creativity and energy and foresight, this once decaying structure would never have been reborn into a public policy institute that it became because of her energy and her creativity and her inventiveness and her leadership. So tonight we're sitting in an auditorium that she all but excavated with her own hands and with her heart. And last week, she and all of us at Hunter who have the pleasure and honor of working for her celebrated her 17th anniversary as president of Hunter College. Jennifer. Tonight's program is a great way to open the summer. However, it felt outside earlier this week. This is the first day of summer. And I will not be introducing Stan tonight. That task will fall to the history-making figure I want to call to the rostrum now. Carl McCall served with enormous distinction in a number of major leadership roles over the decades in New York, including New York State Comptroller, making history as the first African-American ever elected to statewide office in New York. He was also a state senator. I remember Carl as a state senator. That's how far back I go. Commissioner of the State Department of Human Rights, president of the New York City Board of Education, and since 2011, chairman of the Board of Trustees of the State University of New York. I'm not only a longtime fan and admirer, I even had the honor of calling him a colleague, albeit briefly, about 37, 38 years ago. And now I have the honor of introducing him to you, Carl McCall.
Thank you. Harold, thank you very much for that gracious introduction and for your leadership. You're the only historian I know, and you you bring great honor to that position, and we know why when you don't know all these details about so many things. Madam President, Jennifer, thank you for your leadership of this great institution and the one associated with it. To have you as a colleague promoting higher education, public higher education, is a real delight, and thank you for your service. I'm here tonight to be just looking forward to this great occasion and what we're going to hear. You know, a few years ago, I guess it must have been maybe 7, 8 years ago, I got an invitation from the White House. And I don't know how I got on that list, but it was an invitation inviting me to join with the President Obama, who was coming to Brooklyn for an event. And I was invited to be there. And I kind of thought, why is President Obama coming to Brooklyn? Well, I found out that the president, as you well know, was a real advocate for education and was always looking for educational programs that were innovative and effective. And he identified one in Brooklyn, and he thought it was so important that he wanted to come there and celebrate and to let others know about the value of this program. The program was called P-TECH, and it was a program for students in grades 9 through 14, a cooperative program between high schools, colleges, and corporations. And it was for students who were usually underperforming, but they were given an opportunity in this program to learn the STEM skills and to be prepared for real careers in the technical industry when they finished. And this program was really significant. But what it was in my mind is a remarkable Stan Litow achievement. And Stan Litow's career has been a series of remarkable achievements. He was the Deputy Chancellor of the New York Public Schools, President of the IBM Foundation, and President of Corporate Citizenship and Corporate Affairs for IBM. In this extraordinary career at IBM, he did an outstanding job and had tremendous recognition for really making sure that the great services and technology of IBM was made available to try to address public issues and and to find solutions to complex public issues. And he did that with great distinction. He has published enlightened and insightful articles and commentaries in a variety of prestigious publications. Now, he has written a book, and we're going to hear about his latest remarkable achievement. I took away from the book that it was a call for action on the part of corporate America, encouraging them and insisting that they address complex international and national problems to eradicate poverty, to deal with climate change, to deal with inequality. And it was not only a call to action, but it was also a call to opportunity. He was saying to corporations that if you contribute your human capital and your material assets to address the complex problems that we're facing, this will not only be good for society, but it will make you sustainable and successful. So this is a great message, and we're going to hear about it. And from a personal level, Stan and I have been, or he has been to me, a trusted and wise friend. We've worked together. In fact, every educational enterprise that I've been involved in, Stan was there, thank goodness. He was the Deputy Chancellor when I was the president, I guess, of the New York City Board of Education. And working together there, and we then solved all the problems of the K through 12 system. And as a result of that, we graduated, and we're now in higher education. And we're trying to make the State University of New York the most accessible, quality, affordable higher education institution in the world. And when we do that, it will show that that's just one more of Stan Litow's remarkable achievements. Stan Litow.
Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to hear such kind words. I wish my mother were around to hear you, Carl. It really, I very much appreciate that. And we do go way back, and we have worked very, very closely together. And I like to point to the achievements, but I also like to point to the horrible things we prevented from happening. So sometimes even more important than the achievements. So I know we don't have a lot of time, but what I'd like to do is to go through with you the book that I've written, why I wrote it, what's in the book, and then hopefully a little bit about the next step and what I would like to do next, and hopefully what I'd like you all to help me to do. So let's start off with why. What was the reason putting a book together to talk about the challenge for business and society from risk to reward? I started, thinking about this during the onset of the presidential campaign. And I think the private sector was taking it from the left and from the right, from all sides, about corporations are evil, the horror of Wall Street, the horror of the private sector. And it really started peaked during the presidential campaign. It started during the recession and feeling that the bad behavior in the private sector had really resulted in a dip in the U.S. economy, and it was threatening the country. And then it escalated to the point where the rhetoric and the accusations were not just about financial institutions, not just about Wall Street, but it was the entire sort of private sector. And as someone who began his career working in government for the mayor of the city of New York, had worked in public service, as Carl said, as deputy chancellor, but also in a number of presidential commissions, gubernatorial commissions, I really feel that while there's lots of opportunity to criticize the private sector, there's also lots of opportunity to praise it. Because the track record is not about rhetoric, it's about fact. So one reason for the book was to really set the record straight and talk about the good news, the bad news, and really what does the private sector really represent from a historical standpoint. What about over the last 100-year period? Where are we today? And where could we be in the future if we learn to embrace change regardless of the sector of the economy, whether it's public, civil society, or the private sector? We've got some serious challenges to address. And how could we address them if we don't point fingers at one another, but if we learn to work together in a far more collaborative way? So that was the idea. So the book, From Risk to Reward, is that corporations sometimes behave in a positive way because they want to protect themselves against a risk. They want to engender the trust of people so that if things go bad, they can rely on people's help. And that's an interesting motivation, and sometimes it results in good things. But if we move from risk to reward, then we can talk not just about ensuring that we don't get criticized, but really move toward the next step, which is how do we get out front and try to solve critical problems. So that's what the challenge for business and society from risk to reward is about. So where do we start off? And I think it is important that we learn from the history of our country. Where are we now? So back in the past, we have lots of examples of bad behavior, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We'll get to the good in a second, but there's lots of examples of bad. The robber barons at the onset of the 20th century, doing all kinds of things that were bad behavior, bad ethics, bad values, and hurt people in very significant ways. Some of the people became great philanthropists. Andrew Carnegie. We could walk to the Frick Museum, Henry Frick. The Rockefellers. How they operated their business was different from how they operated with their personal philanthropy. After they were in business, they were very generous. We can credit Andrew Carnegie for the public library system. We can credit the Rockefellers for contributing to family planning and public education. There are lots of examples of people who were very generous and very philanthropic, but they didn't necessarily operate their businesses in a very ethical fashion. And Carnegie and Frick went so far as, with a little bit of a recession, they cut their salaries for their workers. And as they demonstrated in the street, they hired Pinkerton guards, and what did they do? They shot them. They were dead as a result of just demonstrating to try to get a fair wage. So that's the bad. And that bad, at that point in time, didn't end. Because historically, there are many examples, and I go through them in the book, of really unethical behavior. But was it because their money came from the private sector, or was it because they had bad ethics, bad values? And as someone who has worked in the public sector and the voluntary sector, as have many in the room, bad ethics and bad values are not about one sector of the economy. There are lots of examples of government leaders who had bad ethics. Lots of examples of people in civil society. While we praise the not-for-profit community and they do great work, it's not universally wonderful. Lots of examples of bad ethics. So is it about where your paycheck comes from, or is it about your values? And are there examples of real progressive leadership in the private sector? Well, I like to point out in the book that there are many examples. How many in the room know when the first private pension plan started? The first one. It wasn't regulated. It wasn't legislated. The American Express Company set up the first pension plan in 1875. There were Civil War veterans who got pensions, but there were not people in the United States who got pensions. It was started by a company in 1875, more than a half a century before Social Security. And by the early part of the 20th century, there were about 400 companies that had private pension plans. Why did they do that? They did it because they were looking to build loyalty among their employees. They felt that that was something that was important to do from a progressive standpoint, to enrich your company and to build that kind of loyalty. In the early part of the 20th century, companies started to developing something that was new called a paid vacation. In the early part of the 20th century, by 1905, there were over 400 companies that offered 1 week of paid vacation. If you worked for New York State, you got no vacation. They were closed on Christmas, but you didn't get paid for it. So that was another example of progressive activity in the private sector. Before the 20th century, and not in the US, in the UK, George Cadbury had a candy company, and he set up low-cost housing for his employees. He had a consortia of male and female employees advising the company about labor practices and behavior in the community, and did all kinds of progressive things. So there are lots of examples of, and it wasn't with a gun to your head. It wasn't because you were forced to do it. It was because people thought that was something that would make their company more profitable, and it was something that they thought they should do. In 1920, George Eastman, who founded a company, Eastman Kodak, in 1920, he took 1/3 of all of his stock holdings and he gave it to his employees. He wasn't forced to do it. He decided to do it. For the amount of money that was today, it would be like a front page story in the New York Times of a CEO giving $1 billion of stock to their employees. And it would be news. And it was news then. But it was about real progressive leadership. And in terms of public-private partnership, I'm glad that Harold mentioned the fact that upstairs in the library, Franklin Roosevelt and Francis Perkins came up with the idea of Social Security. But when Social Security was enacted, Francis Perkins started talking to people about how are we going to implement this program. She talked to consultants across the country. She brought them in and they told her that it would probably take 2 to 3 years before you could put this program into practice. Why? Because there were 26 million people that you'd have to set up a system to make deductions from the paychecks. They worked for over 3.5 million companies, and it was not possible to do in less than 3 years. And she had a relationship with a guy named Tom Watson, who ran a company called IBM, and she called him in and asked, well, is this something that actually could be done? And he said, well, let me talk to my people at the company. And he went back and talked to them, and they said, they're right. It's 2 to 3 years, absolutely impossible. And he said, it can't be impossible. Is there any way that this could be done? And they said, well, there's this machine that we've been talking about building. We've been calling it a collator. And if you could actually invest in building this machine, you probably could turn this thing around in less than a year. But it's going to cost anywhere from $3 to $5 million. And it's a competitive bid. You have no idea that you could actually get the contract. And he said, I'll give you the money, let's build it. And IBM got the contract, they managed Social Security, and within 3 years, he doubled the size of his company. So it was an investment that he made from a business standpoint, but it was also an investment that he made because he believed in what they were attempting to do. And he thought that it was an investment that would pay dividend not only for the company, but for society, public-private partnership and collaboration. And that continued historically. In the 1950s, IBM opened 2 manufacturing plants below the Mason-Dixon line, one in North Carolina and one in Kentucky. And the CEO of the company insisted that they be integrated. There were no integrated manufacturing plants. There were no integrated plants of any kind below the Mason-Dixon line. And it was something that he believed in. He insisted on it. He had the economic weight to be able to put it into practice. And in 2 cities in the South, they integrated the schools. That was about progressive leadership. And then, not long afterward, when Jack Kennedy was elected president, he convened a group of business leaders in the White House and appointed Lyndon Johnson to chair the group to talk about what the private sector could do to change their hiring practices and hire more African Americans. And within 3 years, the people in the room delivered about 13% increase in their African American population. And Watson was proud of the fact that he doubled that. He had more than 28% increase in the numbers. But if you look in the IBM archives, which I had an opportunity to do, every time the human resources people in preparing for the meeting demonstrated what they did, he wrote, "Not good enough." And he pressed them time and time again. They would come up with a number, and he would say, "Thank you very much, not good enough." And that's not a story about one individual in the business sector. There are lots of other examples. That's about progressive behavior. It didn't mean that he didn't want a profitable company. He did. And there were many other business leaders who followed that same line of thinking. But it was just like the examples of the paid vacation and the pension plan and eliminating piecework and providing overtime pay and engaging in environmental practices. It's not about where your money comes from. It's about the ethics of the individuals and the organizations. And those examples in terms of, environmental practices, anti-discrimination, whether it's about race or ethnicity or gender, we can find those examples in the private sector. At the same time, we have the history of the robber barons. So we have the good, we have the bad, and we have the really ugly. But it's not about the decade. It's not about the year. It's not about the month. It's not about the week. So we've had those examples. That's our history. That's our history. We've tried to institute regulation to prevent it, but while regulation is a good thing, and I think people who violate it should be held accountable, but that's not going to create strong, solid ethics and values. It's going to take more than just a regulation to change people's behavior. So where are we today? Is it different than the past? There are examples of really, really innovative and creative behavior. It's not about any one company. A company like Starbucks offers free tuition for its employees. Small companies like Kind Healthcare Bar Company institutes opportunities for its employees to volunteer and engage in the community. Chobani, a yogurt company, does the same thing and enriches its employees and treats them fairly. J.P. Morgan Chase has a program to assist cities, has done an enormous amount to improve the plight of people in a city like Detroit. American Express, after the pension plan, has spent a lot of time enriching the skills and ability in the not-for-profit sector. And in my experience, working for the IBM company, Carl mentioned the example of P-TECH. And this is a program that was really innovative when we set it up back in 2011. The idea of creating a different model for education, a grade 9 through 14 program. High school is not enough. Making sure that every student gets at least a 2-year college degree. Making sure that the college courses are free. Making sure that every student has a mentor. Making sure that every student has access to an internship. That the workplace skills of problem solving and writing and presentation skills are integrated into the education system. This program began here in New York, in Brooklyn. That school is in year 7. Its college completion rates are 500% higher than the national average. The school on Albany Avenue in Brooklyn, across from Albany Houses, one of the toughest public housing projects in the city, has the highest percentage of low-income African-American males of any school in the city of New York. And its success got the President of the United States to come to Brooklyn to visit P-TECH and talk about it in the State of the Union. And is that an example of success? Yes, but building one school or designing one school that's effective is not a systemic change strategy. My experience in education is that when educators are told there's a school that's successful, they will say, of course it's successful. Your school is on 23rd Street, ours is on 24th Street. 23rd Street is a whole different story. Or your school is 5 stories, ours is 4 stories. Or you're K-6, we're K-5. It has nothing to do with us. So if you're looking to build a systemic change, you have to design it in a way that it can actually build from one school to multiple number of schools, and that's why there are over 90 P-TECH schools now across the United States and around the world. By the fall of 2019, there'll be 200, and it has become the model for what legislation is now being enacted in Washington, the Perkins Act, which will help revise how schools are operating off of this model that started as a collaboration and partnership in New York City. So that's an example of success. So just like we have the examples of progressive behavior in the past, that's a current example. In this very room, 3 years ago, we convened a group of the most important education leaders in the United States and said, there's a new piece of technology, artificial intelligence, the Watson technology. If you were going to harness that technology and use it to make a significant improvement in education, what would you do? What could you do? And in that discussion, and I stood up here at the microphone talking with the people in the room, very quickly people started to say, well, if you're going to do something significant, it's got to be something that will improve the quality of teaching. Could this technology improve the quality of teaching? And we got a commitment that day to build something called Watson Teacher Advisor, which would be a personalized coach for teachers to help guide them through the process of being an effective teacher. And it's live, it's free. There are about 12,000 teachers who are using it, and in a recent survey, 9 out of 10 said that they would recommend it to another teacher, 7 out of 10 said it significantly saved their time, and nearly 6 out of 10 said that their students would have the ability to improve their achievement in math. And that's an example of something that was done with the energy and commitment, A, of a company, but also of some of the best educators in the United States, working collaboratively to make that change. Another example is something that people call the corporate version of the Peace Corps. started at IBM, where the top talent, the best 500 employees every year, are given 1 month to work in teams around the world to solve some of the most challenging problems facing society. One team working in Nigeria did the infrastructure for the healthcare program for poor women and children. And tens of thousands of poor women and children have benefited from this work done in the public interest. And the company benefited by having employees who were then given the best skills and given the ability to deliver and understanding, cultural adaptability skills and listening skills and teamwork skills to be able to achieve. These are the same examples today, similar to the examples of strong leadership that I talked about in the past, happening today. So these are all examples of the good. But does that mean that we've eliminated the bad? Does that mean that we don't have bad behavior from companies? Hardly. Hardly. Bernie Madoff, right? Is Madoff, there's no other example of a Bernie Madoff? No. There are people who are unethical in the private sector, and we have to constrain their behavior. Enron, an example of a company that was identified as having strong ethics in an evaluation that was publicly released. The WorldCom example, the horrible thing that the senior executives at Volkswagen or Wells Fargo did. So have we distanced ourselves from the robber barons? Have we constrained bad ethics and bad behavior? Obviously not. So in the past, there was the good and the bad and the ugly, and here we are today, and what have we got? We've got the same kind of behavior. The examples of leadership and the examples of positive behavior are truly significant, and they're worth recognition. But is that enough to get everybody to raise the bar and behave at a higher level? When we expose the bad behavior and put certain people in prison, is that enough to constrain the bad behavior from replicating and continuing? Hardly. So the two parts of the book, the history and where we are today, leads us to a different way forward. And a lot of what I write focuses in on the problem that we have in terms of education, jobs, and a future for America, a future that could look brighter than the past and brighter than the present. What do we have to do? We have to create a culture of ethics and service. If you go to a professional school, a business school, there are some who have a course in ethics, and that's a good thing. But is it part of your finance course? No. Is it part of your advertising course, marketing course? No. You can go to law school and you can take a course in legal ethics. Is it part of the entire legal program or the entire medical program? Is it part of how we educate young people in our high schools? Is it part of what the education system is about? I'm not asking to change the curriculum, but how we teach it ought to find a way to stress strong ethical behavior. And if that's part of how we educate the next generation, we could actually build a higher ethical standard and stronger values through our education system. And then what about in the workplace? Everybody gets evaluated for their performance. Is that evaluation part of how they demonstrate strong ethical behavior? Hardly. There are people who have to understand what the Foreign and Corrupt Practices Act is about and understand how you shouldn't violate the law. But strong ethics and strong values needs to be part of education. It needs to be part of the workplace. It needs to be part of how we reward people financially for their high performance, because if we did that, there would be less risk and there would be a lot more reward. That's step number one. Number two is to understand that there isn't any problem that could be solved by one company or one sector of the economy operating alone. We need to take on the most important challenges in a collaborative way, working together, putting our resources on the table, and sharing responsibility for solving problems together. And I have a couple of examples in the book that I'd like to share with you. Number one is talked a little bit about the teaching issue and how do we build skills among our teachers, but we've got a teacher shortage, especially in the areas of science and math and technology. But we've got millions of people who are nearing retirement at the end of their career, and they don't want to retire. They want an encore career. They want an opportunity to find a way to have their second career be something that they really care about. Now, at IBM, we started a very small program called Transition to Teaching, where 100 employees had the financial contribution of the company to get certified and get the skills and be able to move into the classroom. And that's great, 100 teachers. Could we find a way to bring 100,000 of those people into the classroom, trained and skilled? We could. Part of it could come from the companies. Part of it could come from the individuals themselves. Part of it could come from support from the government. There are about 1.5 million people who are nearing retirement out of the technology areas in the United States. If just 1 out of 10 decided that they wanted to secure a second career as a teacher, we could make an impact on our education systems that would pay dividends for the country. That's one example. Second, higher education is very good at reaching out to the private sector to create collaborations on a higher education level. Here in the city, we've got the Cornell Technicon right in the river, and working with companies and Cornell, creating opportunities for people at the higher education level. Very, very important. We within the State University of New York reach out to the private sector all the time. It's become a critical component in Silicon Valley, companies working with higher education institutions. But what about elementary and secondary education? In a city like Chicago, they closed a large number of schools that were half occupied. They did the same thing in Detroit. They did the same thing in Pittsburgh. What about providing an opportunity to turn that vacant space into maker space? Bring entrepreneurs into elementary and secondary schools. Give businesses the opportunity to grow their businesses within the context of a school, with the proviso that they provide mentoring, training for teachers, support for parents. You could make a game-changing opportunity for young people and also grow significant and important businesses. Another example in the book is something that's going on now at at AT&T, a technology company that has seen a large number of its jobs getting ready to vanish because of changes of the skill demands in the workplace. And they put up $200 million to retrain many of their employees to give them the educational opportunity and the skills that they need to continue to work for AT&T. This is something that could be expanded around the country. Call it Apprenticeship 2.0, as I do in the book. Surveys have said that over 60 to 70% of people in the workforce right now think their job is at risk because they don't have the right skill to be able to succeed into the future. What about reskilling those people with the kind of education skills and training skills that would keep them in the workforce? That's something that our community colleges could do if they had the resources to be able to do it. So those are some of the examples, if we think about the way in which we could operate in the private sector, could operate differently into the future. And then what about regulation in a different way? What about not regulating bad behavior, but what about incenting good behavior? What if there were an incentive for higher levels of performance? What if companies were incented to have their employees convert their housing to solar? What if people were incented to behave in a different way, in the way in which they work to preserve the environment in more substantive, substantial kinds of ways. We could be talking about a different kind of regulation. And it doesn't only have to be financial reward, it could be recognition. It could be an opportunity to recognize that kind of behavior and talk about raising the bar and raising the level of performance. And that would be an opportunity not just to put into place some of the 3 or 4 ideas that I talked about, which could easily be done, but to give people the opportunity to think about the kinds of things that could really, really make a difference. And I'm optimistic about this because the millennial generation are telling the companies that they work for that they don't want to work for a company that doesn't have a high, strong ethical standard. Did you read today's paper about the employees at Microsoft who came out front and said they don't want the company that they work for to be working with ICE on an immigration system that doesn't make sense for them? What about the employees who got up and spoke out after U.S. policies about discrimination were anathema to them? So the next generation, the people that the companies want, the top talent, they want to work for companies that have strong ethics. So that's the added incentive for people to begin to embrace the kinds of ideas that I'm talking about in this book. So that's what the future could look like if we operated in a different way. But let's go back to the book cover. That's a challenge. To do what we've always done, the good and the bad, is something in our history. The good and the bad is where we are today. And by the way, if we turn the clock forward, guaranteed we'll have many, many examples of strong, positive behavior. But if we turn the clock forward, we'll have more Bernie Madoffs. We'll have examples of bad behavior. Now, the attitude of the general public could change. We could go back to the point where there were television commercials that said, when E.F. Hutton talks, everybody listens. Remember those? That private sector is so good, they could operate prisons, they could operate schools, they could solve every problem. So we could potentially see shift in the attitudes of the American public, and they could go back to the 1980s when corporations could do no wrong. They could go back to the 1920s when corporations could do no wrong. Or we could be in the situation we are today, or the situation that we have been, when there is the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I think that it is an opportunity. We're at an inflection point. We can talk about risk, or we can talk about reward. Now, I wrote the book for a couple of reasons. First of all, I'd like people to read it. I think that would be encouraging from my standpoint. And the former CEO of the IBM company, Lou Gerstner, who hired me at IBM, wrote the foreword, and he said, Stan, make the book 200 pages or less, or nobody in the business community is going to read it. So I did. So I hope a lot of people read the book, and that would be good. But I'd like us to go beyond that. I'd like it to go from reading the book to supporting the kind of action that I think really need to take place. I think we need corporate leaders who will step up and operate and function at a much higher level, and I hope that that inspiration, and there are many on the book jacket on the back who have endorsed the book, and I'm looking forward to having them not just endorse it, but to change their behavior and up their game to behave at a higher level. I'm also looking for people in government to embrace it. I would like to see this kind of challenge be something that we could talk about in the political debate instead of the finger pointing and the railing against people based upon where they get their money as opposed to what they could do differently. So my idea is that this could be a challenge and an opportunity so that business could work effectively to solve the problems and the challenges of society. So that's what it's all about. So thank you very much. And I'm told we have about 10 or 15 minutes to answer any questions. I will answer them. If anybody has a question, there are microphones. Please raise your hand. No?
Are you familiar with Sleeping Giants? It's
Yeah.
a social media platform, and a woman seems to be telling people which corporations are doing
Yeah.
what she considers right and wrong. How do you want to address that?
I think that those are the things that that the public should do. They should hold people accountable. They should raise the level of performance. They should give people an opportunity to succeed. I just don't think it's enough. I mean, I think we have to have more systemic change to be, well, like I talked about, shared governance and shared investment in raising the level of performance and helping people understand how they could achieve at higher levels. Yes? Raise your hand. They've got microphones.
Thank you. Hi, I really enjoyed your talk. I have been impressed with some volunteer work that I'm doing at the high level of the, and different level of the kids who go to charter schools. My own views about charter schools are mixed, but I'd like to know what you feel charter schools could add to this, since you spent a lot of time talking about education, and I think education is very important. And also, maybe you didn't say anything much about soft skills either, which is very important.
Yeah, it is. And actually, I prefer to call them essential skills rather than soft skills, but that's just my issue. But charters, when the concept of charter schools began, it was embraced by the head of the teachers union, Al Shanker, who was a big, strong advocate for charter schools. So the idea of a charter school was different regulation and different way of operating that would come up with ideas that then could be mainstreamed in all schools. And that's where we lost our way. So instead of having a system that was designed to improve all, it became a system that was separate. I'm not opposed to it. I think that there are good charters. I think there are charters that are not so good. I think there are some that are average, just like there are within public schools. I do think we need to innovate. But I don't think the answer is to set up separate systems. I think the answer is to improve the system that we've got. One of the things about the P-TECH schools is their open enrollment. Any student can get in. We had the graduation ceremony at the P-TECH school in Newburgh, New York, just last week. Newburgh has the highest crime and drug rate in the state of New York. And 35% of the students at the graduation at the end of 4 years got their high school diploma and their 2-year degree in cybersecurity. 35%. The grade point average of the students was 3.2. 4.0 is straight A. And 94% of the students in poverty, passed their college courses. That was an open enrollment school. So I don't think you have to set up a creamed environment to produce success. I think you can do it for all children.
I liked your idea of introducing ethics into business and education and throughout the entire panorama of everything. The problem that I see is that we're in a society now with two parallel systems of ethics, and they don't really collide into a single unified ethics. How do you integrate ethics if you don't really have a specific ethics? How does that work? I mean, if everybody is like this room, you're fine. But there's another room someplace else where there's a parallel conversation going on, and it's not the same.
Well, I think that we can agree to certain common standards in terms of ethical behavior, about how you behave with your fellow employees, how you treat people in a commercial setting, the kinds of things that you will do and the kinds of things that you won't do. And I don't think it's an impossible challenge to set those high ethical standards about trust, about personal responsibility, to your colleagues. And I think that is something that can be the ethical standard that we would all operate under. And I think those standards can be achieved. They can also be changed over time. But it is a challenge for business and a challenge for society to really operate with a strong sense of ethics. I do think it's possible. Okay, I think we have time for 2 more questions. Yes?
How can society, we can call them citizens, help raise the bar or change the paradigm to instill ethics at the political level, which we know that politicians more and more serve less and less the interests of the people who elect them?
Well, I think we have to vote. That's number one. I don't think we can sit back and, I don't think we can tolerate a system where 50% of Americans vote. I think that people have to be informed and they have to vote. And the issues that Americans are starting to care about immigration and about diversity, while there are some who are outliers and may never change, but I think we have to stimulate people's goals and objectives, and then we need to get them to vote. And people will be held accountable if people do it at the polling place. I really believe that. So we've got one more.
I was hoping you could share a story from your own personal experience at IBM, maybe convincing them on how to adopt a specific CSR or other program that didn't have a direct impact on the company. Say, wasn't producing people that could go work for IBM, but maybe the ones that isn't as obvious. That would be really interesting to hear.
Sure. Well, when I started working for the company, I was there a couple of years, and there was a problem in what was a Superfund site in the Hudson Valley, that the behavior of the company back in the 1950s had led to the creation of the Superfund site, and IBM had to invest resources in cleaning up that site. And over a 15 to 20 year period, it was totally clean. And they tested year after year over a 6-year period, and there was no problem whatsoever. And in year 7, a problem arose. And we had a meeting with the lawyers and the technical people and the government programs people and the communications people all together. What are we going to do? And the lawyer said, we don't think we're accountable for this because the problem didn't exist over this period of time. And the technical people said, well, it's not 100% clear that that could have been caused by our behavior because it was clean for this period of time. And I had an opportunity to get up and say, this is going in the wrong direction. We've got to invest in this because if we don't, we're going to hear it from the community, we're going to hear it from elected officials, and whatever we think we're going to benefit if we paid our lawyers to take on these lawsuits, we're going to lose 10 times over. And I was very proud and pleased that the company decided not only to continue to invest in cleaning the site, but instead of drawing the line around where we would clean, make it the entire community. And that was an example, I think, of the right kind of values. Thank you very much.
Stan, thank you, and Carl, thank you for joining us tonight. You know, it's been a while since we've had a program that ended on an optimistic note. I was just thinking how optimistic, what an action plan we have out of this evening. So now let's carry that optimism and energy upstairs to a reception in honor of Stan where you can all buy the book, and you all should, based on your enthusiasm. Please join us upstairs. Thanks again.